Hello, welcome to my channel. If you're new, welcome. If you're not new, this is actually my first ever video. So maybe you're from the future when, God willing, I've made more. Or maybe you're confusing me with another brunette with bangs who talks about books on the internet. There seems to be a lot of people in that category, so I might as well just add on to the pile. Anyway, for my first ever video, I wanted to talk about women in translation. August is Women in Translation Month. It is simply a month meant to highlight women authors who write in languages other than English who have had their works published into English. I read a lot of books from both translated authors and women authors, so when we combine the two, fantastic. I love it. Um I did have a pretty hard time narrowing down the books that I was going to share in this video. I have read a lot of books that fall into this category. I could probably make an entirely different video with other picks that I have, but the pile that I came up with, I think, includes a little bit of variety. Most of them are kind of literary fiction, although some different vibes within, some different kind of influences from other genres. Plus, I wanted to come up with a pile that didn't have too many repeated countries. I didn't want to be too stuck in any particular one country or one region of the world. Let me start with the one book from this category that I actually got around to this month. I was hoping to get around to a few, but I was really busy kind of finishing up my summer vibe, kind of reading like the light, airy, atmospheric summer reads before fall came. The one book that I did get to this month, because it was both Women in Translation and summary, is The Summer Book by Tove Jansson. This book I have been seeing around a lot more. Maybe you also have. Although I don't know if this is like a Bader Meinhof effect where I heard of it and suddenly I'm hearing about it everywhere. This was translated from the Swedish by Thomas Thiel. Tove Jansson is actually a Finnish author. However, she is part of the Swedish speaking minority in Finland. If you don't know anything else about her, she is also the author who did the Moomin Trolls, the cartoons. They're pretty famous, I know, at least in Scandinavia. I'm sure you'd know them if you saw them. Tova also wrote some novels, and this is the first novel of hers that I have read. As I said at the start, this is kind of a light, hopeful, fluffy sort of summer read. It follows a girl named Sophia and her grandmother throughout a summer on an island in Finland. They live a pretty remote life. It is just them and Sophia's father and some distant neighbors, and it is just a very slow, chill, relaxing novel. It's not without its conflicts. There's certainly little conflicts that happen throughout, but a lot of the books that I am going to talk about today and I am going to talk about in general are fairly character focused. However, I would say this one is especially so. Instead of one big plot line, it's more like a bunch of little vignettes throughout the summer of Sophia and the grandmother and the people and the nature around them. This is the sort of book that I can't really tell you much more about. You just kind of have to pick it up and read it if that sounds intriguing. Although I thought it was a very atmospheric read for the summer, I think that it would be nice maybe in the fall or the winter just to kind of get back into the summer feeling. This book also includes a few illustrations by the author. Uh, they don't look exactly like her Moomin Troll stuff, but I think you can kind of tell that it was certainly, drawn by the same hand. You can kind of see a little bit of her style peek through. So I liked that. But yeah, that is The Summer Book by Tove Jansson. Next, I'm going to talk about some of the short story collections that I wanted to highlight. The first one is The House Guest by Amparo Davila. She is a Mexican author, and this was translated from the Spanish by Audrey Harris and Matthew Gleason. As I said, this is a short story collection. It is pretty short, um, and it is certainly literary. However, I think it kind of falls more into the category of literary horror. The back compares it to Kafka, Poe, and Shirley Jackson, if that kind of gives you a general vibe. I don't remember anything much about any of the stories in particular. I did read this quite a while ago. I want to say either late 2021 or maybe early 2022. I do remember the kind of general feeling it gave me, though. It was very creepy and atmospheric. While I would say it is horror, like I said, it is maybe less supernatural and more psychological, although I do remember there being a mix of both. This is one that I would like to revisit. I want to make a list of books that I want to reread. I think that reading is a skill. I think there's a lot of books that I might have gotten more out of if I had read them with my current skill set. Now that I have read more of the classic authors that this is being compared to, I think that I might go in with a fresh perspective on this. I do remember enough, and I did get enough out of it to want to recommend it to other people, though, especially for the upcoming spooky season. And I don't have too much to say about this, but I think it's worth a shot. Next, I have two short story collections by the same author. That is Hit Parade of Tears and Terminal Boredom by Izumi Suzuki. Terminal Boredom was translated by Polly Barton, Sam Bett, David Boyd, Daniel Joseph, Aiko Masabuchi, and Helen O'Horan. Hit Parade of Tears was translated by Sam Bett, David Boyd, Helen O'Horan, and Daniel Joseph. This is all translated from Japanese. Izumi Suzuki is a Japanese author. I don't believe I said that at the get-go. Similar to The House Guest, these are certainly more speculative. However, they're definitely more of a sci-fi sort of speculative. There is a certain creepiness to them, though, at least in some of the cases. I'm kind of talking about these together because I don't really have much to say about either of them in particular. Like any short story collection, I think you just kind of have to go in with a general vibe. Izumi Suzuki is an author that has written a decent amount in Japan. However, not all of her stuff has been translated to English. I'm not going to ramble on about these too much, but I would say go into these with an open mind, especially if you haven't really read much sci-fi. I think that the sci-fi elements are minimal enough that if you primarily read literary fiction, this wouldn't completely turn you off of them. I think that the use of some sci-fi elements is actually a great way to better discuss certain elements of our society and our reality, especially when it is set in our society and our reality, and our society meaning Japan in the 70s. Um, but when it's, set in human society and you can see how would characters react to some new technology or an alien or something along those lines, it's an interesting way to uh, examine things that exist that might present themselves differently if the circumstances were completely turned on their head. Anyway, I'm gonna move on. I actually realized, I know I said I tried to get a variety of vibes, but the next two are also kind of speculative. I would say loosely, vaguely sci-fi. um, but certainly literary. Don't click out if you don't think sci-fi is your thing. These could be your thing. Anyway, the next one that I wanted to talk about is The Wall by Marlene Haushofer. She is an Austrian author, and this book was translated from the German by Sean Whiteside. This follows a woman in complete isolation. The general gist is she's in a hunting cabin in the Alps with a couple of people. She stays behind while the rest of them go into town one day and they never return. She goes to bed, wakes up, expects to see them there, and they're still not. So she goes to do some investigating and discovers that she has been walled in. There is a giant transparent wall around this hunting cabin and the surrounding wilderness. There's really no one there. There's just a cow and a dog and some cats. The entire book is just her coping with her new circumstances. She doesn't really know why the wall was put in place. This book was written in the 60s, and the Cold War paranoia certainly seeps in. I believe that her running hypothesis is that this is some sort of potentially like Soviet experiment gone wrong, or maybe it was just an act of war, an act of not Cold War by one of the world powers that had unintended consequences, or actually maybe the intended consequences. She doesn't really have a way to really get these answers, though, so she just kind of surrenders to the circumstances that she has been given, and she learns how to best take care of this dog and this cow and these cats who now pretty much completely rely on her for their continued survival, and she relies on them in turn. They really offer a lot of companionship to her that she otherwise would not have. The premise of this book sounds pretty wild, but it is a pretty quiet and reflective book. Most of the book, other than her trying to survive, is her reflecting on her time before the wall and her place in society as a woman and as a mother. While she was used to caretaking, being a mother, the circumstances in which she is now caretaking for these living things is entirely different from motherhood, and she has all of the independence and agency in the world. Whereas before, she was in charge of the well being of a child, but did not have all of the agency and freedom in the world because she was still living in society under a patriarchal system. And this book is a lot of her kind of deconstructing that. Um, I really enjoyed this one. I have been seeing it more places. And again, as I said with the summer book, I don't know if that's because it's been gaining popularity or maybe my algorithms have just figured me out more and are feeding me content of books that it knows that I will like. And I do, because I've had this on my shelf for a while now. Or I had it on my shelf for a while before I picked it up. So the next and last book that kind of has a speculative bent has a very similar theme. This one is On the Calculation of Volume 1 by Solveig Balle. This is a Danish author, and this book was translated from the Danish by Barbara J. Havland. This book was shortlisted for the Booker Prize this year of 2025, so potentially you've seen it around if you keep up with literary prizes like that. I very much enjoyed this. I believe that it did deserve a place on the shortlist. Now, did I read the other ones on the shortlist? No, maybe I'll get around to those. Some of them did look intriguing. But I really enjoyed this. This is going to be part of a 7-part series, I believe. The first 2 have been translated to English thus far. I think the third one and the fourth one have release dates set, I believe maybe November and then next spring. Don't quote me on that, actually. I do at least want to pick up the second one. I enjoyed this first one enough that I hope that the rest of the series is up to the quality set by this first one. This is about a woman stuck in a time loop. She is stuck in November 18th, and when the book opens, she is on her 121st iteration of November 18th. She does take some time to try to figure out how this time loop works. She knows that everybody else's memory resets, but there are some details that she does try to work out through trial and error. Like the wall, she is isolated and alone and kind of resigns to the circumstances. Unlike the wall, there are actually people around. However, it is still an isolating experience because her husband, for example, does not remember this. His memory resets every single day. In the beginning of the book, she does try to get her husband in on it, but she kind of gives up because it's exhausting to try to have to explain to him every morning why she's there and not on the trip that she was supposed to be on. Anyway, yeah, I enjoyed this one. I think it's worth a try. I think it's worth a try. Next, we've been in Europe for the last 2 picks. Let's move to a different continent. Let's move to Africa, shall we? This next pick is Woman at Point Zero by Nawal El Saadawi. This is an Egyptian author, and this book is translated from the Arabic by Sharif Hatata. This book is, I believe, inspired by a real life woman that the author spoke to. In the preface, she talks about meeting this woman in 1972 in a prison in Egypt, and she was inspired by this woman's story and wanted to write a novel based on it. This book follows a woman who is on death row for murder. It kind of backtracks all the way back to her childhood and shows the reader how she got to this place. The woman that this book follows is born into a poor family, and The combination of her both being poor and being a girl and a woman kind of dampens her dreams and ambitions that she might have been able to achieve if she had been born under other circumstances. It shows this character as, pretty smart and pretty self-starting. However, this book highlights how the systems in place, such as patriarchy and class structure, failed her and prevented her from reaching her dreams, goals, ambitions. In the book, she starts to, I don't know what YouTube will allow me to say, SW, she starts selling her body on the street. And this kind of leads her down the path that eventually leads to the murder of a man. I know that it sounds like I'm basically spoiling the whole book. However, this is all said on the back in fewer, more succinct words. This book is more about the journey and less about the destination, but I definitely think it is worth the read. It is interesting. I definitely think if you're interested in feminist literature, a lot of this is pretty feminist, but if you're interested in feminist literature, this is definitely worth checking out. This author actually has some other books that are on my list. I want to read them eventually. God Dies by the Nile is the next one that I want to pick up. Let me know if anyone else has read any of her other books and which ones you think are worth reading. I definitely think this one is worth a try, though. Next, kind of along the theme of women up against forces that are bigger than themselves, I have Cold Nights of Childhood by Tezer Özlü. This is a Turkish author, and this has been translated from the Turkish by Morleen Freely. Before we get into this one, I am interested in getting into more Turkish literature. However, I'm having a hard time finding stuff written by women. I have read some stuff written by men, and I will continue to read stuff written by men. However, this is one of the few books translated from Turkish and written by a woman that I have been able to find. So if anyone has any recommendations for me, leave them down below. This one follows our main character throughout her childhood and then young adulthood as she struggles with mental health. Mental health is obviously something that is really tough to deal with at any point in history. However, this is mostly set in the 1960s, and in the 1960s, we just didn't really have the models of understanding to best treat mental health. So this shows her kind of in and out of mental facilities, receiving electroshock therapy, receiving treatment that maybe was making things worse, and kind of the in between times in between her stays in psychiatric institutions. I think it also shows the intersection between sexism and patriarchy and mental health system. I believe that those two societal structures do really affect how women are both viewed and treated when it comes to mental health. I thought it was interesting to see this set in another time, in another country. This one was a pretty heavy read, like the last one that I talked about, but it is pretty short. It's just over 100 pages, and I think that in that 100 pages, it really packs a punch. And while it is heavy, the heaviness does not last long because this is quite slim, as you can see. Lastly, I wanted to talk about Boulder by Eva Baltasar. This is translated from Catalan by Julia Sanchez. This is another one that was shortlisted for the shortlisted for the Booker Prize in 2023. This definitely deserved its place on the shortlist. I really enjoyed this. Again, another really short one that packs a punch. This one is about a woman who goes by Boulder. She works on a long haul shipping vessel in South America, and on one of the stops, she meets this beautiful Icelandic woman and falls in love. And she leaves her job and her livelihood and moves to Iceland to be with her. They spend some wonderful, beautiful time together in Iceland before Boulder's partner decides that now that they're settled and happy, she wants to be a mother. She wants to bring a child into the world. And Boulder's kind of skeptical about this, but decides to go along with it because she loves her partner so much. However, bringing a kid into the world really changes things. So a lot of this book focuses on the strain that a new baby can bring into a relationship, especially one that one of the parents wasn't maybe super enthusiastic about. That's really all I'll say about the plot of this one. I think, again, I think this is one that's more about the journey than the destination. I thought the prose in this was really beautiful. I believe the author also writes poetry, and I think that shines through in the prose. while this is short, there's a lot packed into it. Every word is very intentionally chosen. And I think that's also a testament to how good the translation is, because even if it's really beautifully written in Catalan, a skillful translator is needed to express that in the same way in other languages. Anyway, that is Boulder by Eva Baltasar. Next, I'm going to quickly go over some that are on my to read list. These are all of the books that are like women in translation that are on my shelves currently. I have, I think, 7 that I'm just going to go over kind of quickly. I don't have as much to say about these because I haven't read them yet. So the first 2 are by authors that I have already talked about. The first one is another one by Tove Jansson. I have had this book on my shelf for over 4, maybe close to 5 years now. Yeah, I think like close to 5 years now. It had been sitting on my shelf for a long time already, and then my Swedish friend came to visit me. We went and did some book shopping in one of my favorite local bookstores, and she found the copy of the summer book that I have, and she asked me if I'd read it. I said no, but I had a book by that author on my shelves waiting to be read, and she was like, read the summer book first. And I said, okay, you're the expert on Swedish language things, considering you're the Swedish language speaker here. And it took me a while to get around to reading the summer book because this interaction happened in, I think, November of 2022. I didn't get around to it the summer of 2023 or the summer of 2024. And this summer I was like, I need to get around to it. So I finally got around to it. And now I can read the other book by Tove Jansson that has been on my shelf, as I said, literally for like probably 5 years now. So hopefully I get around to that soon. I don't have anything else to say about it. I don't remember why I picked it up because it was so long ago. Anyway, moving on to a book by another author that I've talked about. This is Set My Heart on Fire by Izumi Suzuki. This is a novel. I believe this is the first novel of hers that has been translated into English. And I am very interested to see how similar or different it is from her stories. I believe this is set in Tokyo in the 1970s. I don't really know much about it other than it was written by Izumi Suzuki, whose work I have previously enjoyed, so maybe I'll like this one too. Moving on. Next, I have one that I hope to get to at some point this fall. That is Jawbone by Monica Ojeda. This author is Ecuadorian. I am on a mission to read a book from every country in the world. I'm not speed running this by any means. I think there are some countries that it would still be really hard to get your hands on a book from them, but it is a way to intentionally diversify my reading. So I do keep a spreadsheet of all of the countries in the world and what books I have read from them, if any. I'd seen this book on a lot of kind of weird girl, creepy, fun reading lists, and I decided, why not give it a try? I do love, the weird girl books, as they're often called. Again, I don't have too much to say about this other than I know it's horror. I hopefully will get it at some point this fall, and that's that. Next, I have Sultana's Dream and Padmarag by Rokia Hossein. This is translated from Bengali. This I came about interestingly. I ordered this from Barnes & Noble, and usually when I order things from Barnes & Noble, I go in with a mission in mind. If I'm ordering it from barnesandnoble.com, that means it's a book I've had on my radar for a while, and I have not been able to find it organically at a local bookstore after a certain amount of time. And so I say, okay, I'm just going to go right to the source. I'm going to order it. I usually stick to just that, the books that I've been meaning to read that I haven't been able to find. However, this one was suggested under another book that I was ordering as like a book you may like, and I noticed it was a Penguin classic, but I didn't recognize the cover, so I was intrigued and I looked at it and I read the description, and it said that it's about a woman living in contemporary India, which, when we say contemporary, this book was written in 1905, so, but it's about a woman who wakes up and I think all of the men are gone. No, all of the men are now relegated to the home, so there's kind of a reversal of the gender roles. And I thought I was intrigued by that. It is supposed to be, again, kind of speculative, very feminist, written in a language that I've never read, something translated from before. I wanted to give it a shot. And yeah, I'll let you know what I think of it when I have read that. Next, I have Naked Earth by Eileen Chang. This is an author from China. This book I found at a local bookstore, just kind of browsing randomly. I hadn't really heard much of it before. Whenever I see one of the New York Review books at like a used bookstore, I usually check it out because if you're not familiar with this publisher, they publish a lot of stuff that is otherwise sometimes hard to find. They publish a lot of translated works and a lot of lesser known classics, modern classics. They certainly have some more heavy hitters too. Like I know they just published their own edition of Mrs. Dalloway, and I think, Mrs. Dalloway is not difficult to find. But I have been able to find a lot of interesting stuff that I otherwise would never have read just by looking for this little emblem on the spine when I'm browsing through books at used bookstores and picking them up. This one is about some people in the early years of Mao's China. They're just kind of coping with the revolutionary change that has just taken place, and I believe it just kind of follows some people, again, character driven. I believe it just kind of follows them and, their attitudes and their inner conflicts and stuff like that. Again, I haven't read this one yet, so I can't really tell you, but I can tell you why I picked it up. Anyway, the last two I have are ones that I know a lot of people, pretty much anyone into this kind of general category of books has probably heard of. And I can't believe that I haven't read them yet. I need to get to both of them quite soon. The first one is Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. This is a Polish author, and it won the Nobel Prize in Literature back a few years ago. I have wanted to read this book for a good long while, and I purchased it back a few months ago, and I just haven't picked it up yet. I am hoping soon, though. I know this is one that I will probably like, and I need to get better about just reading books that I know I'm going to like. There are so many books that I know I'm going to like that I just have saved up for no reason. And this is one of them, so last but not least, we have the one and only My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. This book, I believe, was chosen as the best book written so far in the 21st century by the New York Times last year. So, again, I don't know why I've been holding out on it for so long. I was hoping to maybe get to this summer. It didn't happen. Maybe September, we'll see. I feel like I'm already thinking out the things that I maybe want to read in September, and I don't know if this is going to fit, but soon. Soon. I never actually stick to the things I say I'm going to read anyway. I hope you have enjoyed this first ever video on my channel. Maybe I've inspired you to pick up a woman in translation. I hope I've inspired you to pick up a woman in translation. If not now, at least in the future. But yeah, thanks for watching. I would say subscribe, but you don't really have enough material to know if you want to do that yet. Anyway,